Hey everyone, my name is Anurag and I am one of the ambassadors of Kubesimplify. So welcome to Kubesimplify Twitter space. And in this Twitter space, we will be talking about infrastructure as code. And till Victor joins, I will just briefly introduce what Kubesimplify is. So Kubesimplify is basically a community started by Saiyam, and we focus on cloud native things. We mentor people, we give swacks to people, and we also provide mentorship. So I think we should get started now. Let me just briefly introduce the speakers of today. So we are joined by two awesome speakers today. First is Siam and another is Victor. So Siam leads the team at Civo. He is a director of technical evangelism at Civo. And Victor is developer advocate at Upbound and both runs awesome YouTube channels. So Siam runs a YouTube channel with his own name and Victor runs a YouTube channel with the name of DevOps Toolkit. So this was a brief introduction about the speakers, and now we will move on the topics side. So today we will be talking about infrastructure as code and everything around infrastructure as code. So we will be briefly talking about what infrastructure as code is, and in the end we will also take questions from the audience side. And meanwhile, we will also talk about the tools present in the category of infrastructure as code. So let's start. So I think the first question which comes to everyone's mind is what is infrastructure? Means when we are talking about infrastructure as code, what are we talking about? What do we mean by infrastructure? So Sam, can you throw some light on what is infrastructure?
Yeah. So hello everyone, and glad to be here on this space with Victor. So sometime back, I posted a tweet who wants to collab with me and Victor. Want to see that. So we got a good amount of people who wanted both of us to be together. So here we are, and there's one more collab which will be happening. So this is the first one, and Victor is a great friend, and we met at KubeCon as well in person. So we have been chatting, we met as well, and we have the same synergies. Like Anurag mentioned, the YouTube is one of the, like, if you want the real knowledge, you know where to go for cloud native stuff. So with that, let's move to today's topic, which is the infrastructure. So infrastructure as code. Infrastructure as code is not something which is like super new, and people have always wanted to automate as much as they can. Obviously, initially it is like you used to buy the servers, then you used to have a team of sysadmins and stuff who would provision everything, provision the infrastructure, set up everything, configure the tools. For just to give you an example, your infrastructure is something where your application and code, etc., would run. Earlier, it was like your own data centers that you used to build. Then slowly things started moving to cloud, and people slowly started automating their own infrastructures. So people used to write bash scripts, codes to automate as much as stuff as they can. Some of the toolings, it became a bit easier when stuff moved to cloud, because in cloud it's all API based. So cloud is basically API based, where you can request for the resources, request for virtual machines, request for Kubernetes clusters, request for the databases, any sort of things, networking. So all is API based. So the automation started to become easy, and now then slowly we moved from that automation to newer terminology. We obviously introduced the concept of DevOps, and then infrastructure as code. So basically, it's more and more of automation that is being done. So everything codified, or everything basically in a way where your infra sets up automatically. All tasks are done automatically. There are various tools to do that we'll be discussing all throughout this Twitter space. But yeah, on a very high level, this is what infrastructure as code means about me. Over to you, Victor.
Yeah, I mean that's a good description. I would say that infrastructure as code, what we consider today infrastructure as code, has had different names in the past, and it will get different names in the future, because over time our understanding of what infrastructure as code is changes, right? If I take that meaning literally, I could say bash scripts fit the definition of infrastructure as code. Bash is code, right? But over time that evolved. Like today, we consider infrastructure as code something that declaratively defines the desired state, maybe depending on the tool, right? And then we might be saying also the infrastructure as code is something that is continuously converging that desired state into the actual state. We might be saying that infrastructure as code requires communication with that infrastructure through API, which wasn't the case in the past. We might even say that the output of infrastructure as code should be behind an API, right? So it's short version is yes, you define infrastructure as some form of code instead of clicking buttons, you're doing it, right? But in practice, what that really means is changing over time, right? Today, nobody would probably say, hey, I wrote a bash script. Technically, I'm infrastructure as code, but in practice, I'm not.
Thank you, Victor and Sam. So just another follow-up question on the previous one. Means how do we used to define infrastructure in the past? Means how we used to create the infrastructure in the past? I know you both have talked about this, but briefly, can you summarize it? Means how we are progressing to infrastructure as code.
Oh man, my first contact with infrastructure as code was probably with a tool that almost nobody knows about today anymore. It was called CF Engine, which allowed us to define infrastructure in not much different way than today, but written in C, right? It was a precursor of what came later in form of Chef and Puppet. Then we evolved into Ansible, and now we have, or we had for a while, Terraform and Pulumi. And right now, I think that we are entering yet another phase, maybe fourth phase of those types of tools, which is types of tools that go a bit further with drift detection, reconciliation, being behind API, typically in most cases powered by powered by Kubernetes.
Yeah. Sam, can you tell us about what was your first introduction to infrastructure as code?
Yeah, definitely. So earlier, like I told you, like we had these scripts. In practice or technically, it was still infrastructure as code because we were using scripts to define. That in the cloud space, you have the APIs and you can write the scripts to provision stuff and then deploy your applications. Obviously, Kubernetes was not there, or it was just getting started and stuff like that. But some of the tools like Ansible got really popular. It is still used. It is still used in conjunction with some of the tools like Terraform, but I think it will soon have its end of life. I mean, I cannot predict the dates, but yeah, it like Victor said, there are different phases in which it has evolved. So from it had evolved from tools to tools, from scenarios to scenarios. Now everything is more these days more cloud native way of doing things, more Kubernetes way of doing things, and that is where tools like Crossplane come in because it's more Kubernetes way of doing stuff. So that's where things are getting popular because in the end, now the whole cloud native ecosystem, if you talk about CNCF, the whole cloud native ecosystem is revolving around the single beast, which is Kubernetes. Because every technology tool company that is getting built in the cloud native ecosystem is to solve a specific problem with or around Kubernetes. So since the containerization era, which is like, in 2012, 13s, the containerization has picked up, then your Kubernetes have picked up, and now it is everything revolves around Kubernetes and newer tools, any tool, like take example of in the policies, you have Keverno. So all the tools are revolving around Kubernetes way of doing things, and people adopt those a bit quicker than the others one because they are used to kind of writing the YAML files, or they're used to kind of know the concepts of Kubernetes. So that's where the Kubernetes way of doing things is the way that the next phase is going forward, like the kubectl apply stuff, doing all the things with the same command line is much more easier than learning different tools, different languages, and then trying to implement the stuff. Though people who are using it at scale, at production, it is fine. But slowly and slowly, it is going to a new phase of the cloud native way and the Kubernetes way.
One significant change that we got with Kubernetes, actually, there are quite a few things that were, I would not say impossible, but very hard, if not impossible to accomplish before. We finally have a single API below which or above which all those tools are building, right? And as a result of that, we have an ecosystem that is designed to interoperate with each other, right? In the past, you could be using something like Jenkins and Terraform and a bunch of other tools, and they were all worlds in themselves, right? What Kubernetes gave us and Kubernetes ecosystem, or let's say CNCF, is that all those tools are designed on the same principles, meaning that no single tool has now the need to implement everything. It's as what you just mentioned. Hey, if you use, let's say, Crossplane to manage your infrastructure, and then you need some policies, Crossplane does not necessarily need to come up with its own solution for policies because you can choose any policy engine in Kubernetes, like Kyber or OPA Gatekeeper. If you need to ship logs, again, the tool that you're choosing does not need to figure out how to ship your logs. You can use Promptail with Locky. If you need monitoring of what you're doing, you can choose Prometheus, for example. And as a result, we are not talking anymore about the benefits of individual tools. We are talking about the benefits of an ecosystem when one adopts Kubernetes. And those benefits greatly outweigh the benefits of any individual tool.
Yep. Yeah, go ahead, Victor, if you're.
No, it's all good, I finished that thought.
Okay. So, means I am not sure about this, but there are people who are still not using infrastructure as code. So, can you give us some pain points that we are trying to solve via infrastructure as code, and what are the tools available out there which they should adopt, or means just listing out the options for them?
So the benefits, the main benefit, at least in my head, is actually there are quite a few, not one. When you start using some provider, let's say AWS, just for the sake of argument, right? It looks like you're going faster and that it's easier if you go to console, fill in a couple of fields, click a button, and all of a sudden you get something, right? But that's only an illusion on the first day or first week or first month while you're learning, right? Tools that infrastructure as code, tools or anything as code for that matter, allows us to actually go much faster because the knowledge is codified. The state that we want is codified. We know exactly what we want to have. We know exactly, we hope that what we want to have is what is going to happen. And we can finally collaborate with each other. Because if somebody in my team goes to AWS console and creates a cluster, nobody knows what that person did. Nobody knows how that person did what that person did, and so on and so forth. The reason for something as code, and that includes infrastructure as code, is no different than, let's say, writing code for your application. All the benefits are the same. You want to share that knowledge. You want to collaborate with your teammates. You want to be able to see a history of what you wanted to do. You want to create pull requests. You want to review, and so on and so forth. The major difference is that people writing applications, whatever that might mean, realize those benefits sooner than other types of professionals. It took a while until operators, sysadmins, testers, and so on and so forth realized and got to the same level to that realization as pure application developers, right? But benefits are exactly the same. And nobody is today questioning, hey, should I write my application as code instead of using some drag and drop tool that will auto-magically create my application, like WordPress, right? Which is fine, but for very narrow use cases. And the benefits are the same, no matter whether that's the code of your application or anything else, including infrastructure. Exactly the same.
Okay. So, Saiyam, would you like to list the options, the tools that are available out there?
Yeah, definitely. Just to highlight and reiterate and add a couple of things more on like why infrastructure as code. Victor has already covered a significant stuff, but I like to kind of phase it in kind of phases. So basically, you have first, setting up the infrastructure. Obviously, you think of analogy like you go to Cloud Console, you create a virtual machine, then you SSH into the virtual machine, then you download some of the tools over there to work with that, different versions. Then you set up the networking on that. You get all the binaries that you need to work with respect to that. So that is all manual, error prone, time consuming. And then even after this, it is the things that you need to do is managing the updates of that, managing the app installs of that, history of that. And let's say you update something manually, then how you roll back. So this terminology is like something drift detection, which definitely we'll be talking about later on. But you do all sorts of things, and then manually, which is more error prone. So IaC, which is like the kind of fancy way of infrastructure as code. So IaC helps you like automate all these tasks, and there are many tools to do that, out of which few are still very well used in practice. Few are somewhat used, which like if you have already written thousands and thousand lines of Ansibles and stuff, you obviously don't go away in a day. So those are still there. So like Terraform definitely is one of the, I would say, biggest player in the industry when it comes to infrastructure as code, uh, with great community, great resources, great courses. So if anybody wants to get started with Terraform, it's super easy to find a blog. It's super easy to find a video on these. Then obviously you have Ansible. So Terraform and Ansible, a lot of people use them in conjunction. You also have like Chef, Puppet, which I hardly see anyone talking about it or using it. There might be obviously people using, but I don't think anybody new starting would be learning Chef or Puppet and doing it. Then you also have Crossplane, Pulumi. So Crossplane is more Kubernetes way, which I was talking about. It is completely in your hands what you define in the YAML file, and you exactly do the same thing, kubectl apply stuff. Pulumi is more of it's also, I would say, not so old player. It came a lot after Terraform, but it has significance. It does provide a lot of value in terms of like choosing your own programming language. Gives you a lot of flexibility, just like you can define everything in your favorite programming language. So it gives you that flexibility, and so those are, I think, some of the infrastructure as code tools that helps you with your infra provisioning and all sorts of things, automating all these things at ease and in a repeatable manner.
Okay. So the next question is to Victor. So Victor, what is your take on cloud-specific infrastructure as code tools like AWS CloudFormation as compared to Pulumi or Crossplane or Terraform?
None of those tools managed to get to the level of more general tools like Terraform, Crossplane, Pulumi, and so on and so forth. And there are quite a few reasons. First, they are provider specific, meaning that if you would need to be locked into that specific provider for that tool to be even considered useful, right? And even if you did choose to run absolutely everything in a single provider, which by the way is never the case, almost never the case, because when we think about providers, we don't think about only Azure and Google Cloud and AWS. We're talking about all sorts of other different services like GitHub, like Datadog, like any other SaaS service that somebody might be using. So almost nobody is exclusively in one provider these days. And even if somebody is only using 100% all the services from a single provider like AWS, those tools do not have enough typically support from the community. They do not have enough effort put into them, and so on and so forth. So I would not say that they are bad, but I'm yet to see any of those provider-specific tools that could compete with any of those that we mentioned so far.
Okay. So Saiyam and Victor both mentioned in the few minutes back the two words, drift and reconciliation. So can you please highlight on that in an easy language?
Okay, I can give it a try. So drift is the difference between the desired state and the actual state. And just to be clear, desired state is what I define that I want something to be. And the actual state is what something really is. So I might define that I want that my cluster should have 5 nodes, and that would be the desired state. And the actual state might be many different things. It might be that that cluster doesn't exist, and then the drift is the full difference between what I want and having nothing. Or it could be that I already have a cluster, but that cluster has 3 nodes instead of 5 nodes, and so on and so forth. So the drift is the difference between the desired state, what something should be, and the actual state, what something is. And then we have drift detection, which are mechanisms to detect those drifts. And we have reconciliation. That's a process. And almost every tool has some form of that process that reconciles, that converges what something is into what something should be. And that's a big difference that we got with infrastructure as code in general, is that all of a sudden we do not need to codify those things anymore like we did long time ago, in shell scripts or Python or whatever we were doing. That by codifying, I meant, okay, if this is like that, then do this, and if that's something like, and if it's something else, then do this, and so on and so forth. So in the past, we had huge if-else statements that were trying to do different things depending on the state. Now we have tools that detect those differences and make sure that they are converged, that they do not exist anymore. The major difference that we are seeing right now is the concept of auto drift detection or continuous drift detection and continuous reconciliation, meaning that in the past, we would detect those differences, those drifts, and reconcile them when we choose to do so. So when you execute whatever your favorite tool is, you execute some command, and then that tool finds the differences and asks you, do you want to reconcile them? Where we are going right now, where we are actually with Kubernetes, and I'm not even talking right now about infrastructure, but about anything, is that now we have processes that are doing that continuously, that are doing that all the time. That could be GitOps tools, that could be Kubernetes itself, that could be cross-plane, and so on and so forth. So instead of us trying to monitor, watch some dashboards all the time to find out that something happened, that something is not as it should be, and then execute our favorite tool, we have those tools running in the background and continuously looking for those drifts and reconciling them.
Okay. So the follow-up question on the GitOps side is that how do we combine GitOps with infrastructure as code? Something like storing all your configurations, all your infrastructure in a repo, and then versioning again and again.
So let's say a problem, not a problem, but a feature of all GitOps tools that are worth mentioning is that they're all and exclusively working inside Kubernetes. Those tools, that could be Argo CD or Flux or Rancher Fleet, basically those are the only options we have right now for pure GitOps tools. They're all assuming that the desired state is defined as Kubernetes resources. And then they're making sure that that desired state is reconciled, right? So the only way for us to apply GitOps with the tooling that we have today is to define something as a Kubernetes resource. Now, that something can be anything, and Kubernetes is designed for that something to be anything. We can define a Kubernetes deployment, and then GitOps tools will make sure that what we define is what the deployment that really is running in our cluster. Or we can define an ingress. An ingress is infrastructure. All of a sudden, that's not an application anymore because ingress will create an external load balancer in your favorite provider. And then if we go further, we can define everything we want, whether through different tools or ourselves, as a Kubernetes resource is designed to be extensible through custom resource definitions and controllers. And as long as we can define what we want and the process that will work on that something as a custom resource definition and a controller, we can apply GitOps to anything. And that's where tools like Crossplane jump in. Crossplane, through its providers, gives us those custom resources and controllers to manage any resource in AWS, any resource in Azure, any resource in Google Cloud or Civo or any other provider. And the provider is not there, it's open source, anybody can add it, right? So if you want to apply GitOps to infrastructure, the only way we can do that effectively today is considering that all the tools, GitOps tools are running inside Kubernetes clusters, that something must be defined as a Kubernetes resource. And then what controller does with that resource, whether it does something inside of the cluster or outside of the cluster, that's the job of controller, not GitOps anymore.
Okay. So just to follow up on that, like Crossplane manages all your infrastructure, but for that we have to run a Kubernetes cluster. So for people or for organizations that are not having a Kubernetes cluster yet, I think Pulumi or say Terraform is the way to go, right?
Yes, but that's absolutely true. But I would argue that every serious organization has at least one Kubernetes cluster for something. We passed that point where Kubernetes is a novelty, where people do not understand the benefits of Kubernetes and so on and so forth. I can safely say that not all, but significant percentage of the companies have Kubernetes cluster. I'm not saying in any form of way that every company is running everything in Kubernetes. I'm not saying that. But almost every company today has at least one Kubernetes cluster for something, whatever that something is. So Kubernetes itself would have been an obstacle if we spoke 5 years ago. But today, that's simply everywhere.
Okay. So next question is to Saiyam. So should we integrate other tools with infrastructure as code tools? Like one is there by Commodore, is valid IaC. So what are the options there when we are trying to integrate other tools with our infrastructure as code provider?
I mean, it's so it's basically you can do whatever you want when it comes to when you're mastering a particular tool. So you can even write your own Terraform modules and you can distribute them. You can have any sort of applications deployed to like valid cube, whatever you said. I haven't used that, but you can integrate with any sort of tooling you want. You can actually use in conjunction that I was saying in Terraform and Ansible, if you like, for some scenarios. People are using it, but soon, again, I tell you, they are moving to the next phase. So it's basically the tool. You have to select what you will be using for your infrastructure as code, and then you can have a Git repository because in the end, people want that nowadays, the GitOps stuff. So you keep everything in Git. And like Victor said, we both actually have a video on this on our channels where we say how using Argo CD, Crossplane application set, you can achieve something which is called true GitOps. Like you can have your infra repository in your GitHub, and you can have Argo CD running on the cluster, which is watching that infrastructure repository. So any new cluster you want to add, any new definitions you want to add, so you will be adding the YAML files, and on the cluster, it will be deploying automatically because Argo CD is watching that. And on the same cluster, you will be having Crossplane deployed. So Crossplane, as soon as you deploy that custom resource, Crossplane controller will see, okay, this has done. So it will create the respective infrastructures, which is mentioned over there. And then obviously you need to have some mechanism to connect the new cluster or whatever to back to the Argo CD so that application sets can kick in and they can install the desired set of applications that you want onto your clusters. So true GitOps exists in today's world. There are some workarounds that you need to do, like connecting back to the Argo CD. So you need to have some sort of scripts that as soon as something is created, it connects back to the Argo CD instance, and then your application set can deploy. Like this is one way, like this is one complete end-to-end way of doing stuff. There can be different approaches that you can take. But yeah, you can definitely do it.
Yeah, sure. So moving forward, I just wanted to ask that what is which project is having the best documentation according to you? Which project is having the best community? Say if one is getting started or want to contribute to the project.
I think contribution wise, all are like open source. We always promote this culture, right? We always welcome new contributors. So I am pretty sure that all of the tools, like the three major ones that we always keep talking is Crossplane, Pulumi, and Terraform. They are pretty well known now in the community. They have a solid community. People contribute towards that. So all that thing is definitely there. Documentation wise, since Terraform is kind of, I always say, the number one in terms of adoption, in terms of community and everything. So I do believe that Terraform has extensive documentation, like you not only from their official website, but also from the community. So you have many blogs, many articles, many videos on that. So I give you a very good example. So in Crossplane, there is a concept of crossplane composition. So you'll only find it on two channels, which is Victor and myself. So you won't find it anywhere else. So that's how it is. Like it's there are some areas where the community is still adopting some of the cool features, like crossplane composition is solid. Like it's we can talk more about it if you want in the end. But just as an example I took, so resources are less. And when you talk about Pulumi, it's more of like decent, I would say. It also have like decent documentation, decent number of articles and stuff, because it is your programming language oriented. So if you are well versed with JavaScript, it is kind of easy for you to understand stuff and implement it using Pulumi. So that's their advantage actually. So, but clear winner for me is Terraform. I don't know about Victor.
Yeah, Terraform has amazing documentation. It has a big community and it exists the longest of those that we are mentioning right now. So Terraform documentation is absolutely awesome. All of us involved in other projects are trying to get to that point, and we are getting to that point. That's the spirit of documentation. Not documentation, of open source. So the only thing I would add is nothing is perfect, and open source is all about collaboration, right? If you find something that you think can be improved, it's only one pull request away.
Yeah. So the next, I will ask one or two more questions, and then we will move to the audience side if they have some questions. So probably the second last question is that if one is wanting, or if one is a student and wanting to get started because they need to improve their resume or something, so what should be the ideal way? What should be the approach to go?
So if anybody wants to start with infrastructure as code, I think plenty of stuff is out there on what is infrastructure as code. I think this space itself has covered a lot of building blocks theoretically, because obviously we cannot share the screen in demo. Otherwise, Victor and I would have loved to do that. But yeah, theoretically, we have explained quite a few things in the IaC ecosystem. We both have a great amount of resources when it comes to some of the tooling which is there. Terraform and Crossplane, like Victor have many videos on Crossplane, so you can check that out. There are few, I think, free courses as well by Sid Pales, one of the great content creators. So he has a Terraform course of 2 hours. You can go through that. And the ideal way of learning can be docs. So each of the documentation, they have a lot of resources. You get started, sign up for a cloud provider, can be CO, it can be any, and then you start using your free credits and start automating your infrastructure using one of the other tools.
The only thing I would add is I would recommend not starting with infrastructure as code unless you already mastered what you are trying to codify. So what I'm about to say is going to be controversial because earlier I said don't go to a console of your provider and create resources by clicking buttons. But when you're learning, that's actually the thing you should do. That's the thing I prefer to do. I always go to, like, for example, when I was learning my first contact with Civo, I did not create a Crossplane or Terraform or any other infrastructure as code definition. I went over there. I created things using the console visual interface first to understand what's going on over there. Once I understand how some infrastructure works, then I would go into the next phase. Okay, now whichever tool I want to use to codify that, I need to learn the tool, of course, and I need to write code or manifest or whatever the format is, but only after I figured out without infrastructure as code how something works.
So the last question is, then we will start taking questions from the audience side. What are the key points that one should consider while using infrastructure as code? Means, what are the best practices around it that one should not forget, or say some bullet points if you want to give?
Sorry, I did not get the question. Can you repeat, please?
Yeah. So I was asking that what are the best practices around infrastructure as code? If you can give some bullet points around it that one should not forget, one should keep that in mind while practicing infrastructure as code.
I don't have any specific points to think about aside from code lives in Git. You need to follow whichever Git practices you chose to follow, whether that's trunk-based development or feature branches and so on and so forth. But the best practices related to a specific tool will greatly depend on the tool itself. In most of those tools, once you pass the initial learning curve, you will want to create some sort of libraries or modules or compositions, or what the name depends on the tool itself, right? Because you do not really want to go directly into, hey, this is how I define a virtual machine, and then you repeat that 1,000 times because you need 1,000 servers. You want to create libraries of sorts that will allow you not to repeat yourself, to reduce the amount of errors and so on and so forth. So make sure that you're following Git practices, and make sure that once you figure out what you want to do, you start encapsulating that into modules, compositions, or whatever the tool calls it.
Okay. Sam, you want to comment on this? Best practices around infrastructure as code?
Yeah, I think Victor has added. There's no defined practices to infrastructure as code. It all depends on first what you want to do. So you can have various approaches, like you can have your architectural diagrams, or you can actually have your already pre-provisioned infrastructure that you have done using clicks and whatever stuff. And you should have a set mindset. Like this is what I want to solve. So the problem you want to solve before going to tool is very important. That's what I always say. In any of the when you're exploring CNCF landscape as well, you should go with a problem. Like I want to have policy. I want to write Kubernetes policy. Then you explore the policy section, see some of the tools, and then you keep add one level to your problem. In policy, I have to do this. Then you start eliminating the tools. So first, you have to start analyzing what you want to do with the infrastructure, how you want to deploy the app, and then you probably would obviously pick a tool with respect to how you want to do that, like Kubernetes way, or you find coding easy, you want to Pulumi way, or you want to go with the most widely adopted as per the current scenario. So you can go with Terraform. So it depends totally on you how to do that. And then again, for that tool, you should definitely follow the best practices with respect to like how you are using it. If you're using Git, how to do the branching strategies, how to put codes, what all to put, what all not to put, values.yaml file, and so on and so forth stuff.
Well, I will need to have a small correction to what you just said. You said if you're using Git. There is no if.
No, I mean, yeah, you have to use Git.
Yep. I will start taking questions from the audience. So I see Angin is there, Dipankar is there. So folks, if you have some questions around infrastructure as code, then you can request and I will add you to the stage. So you can start requesting now. So I see Dipankar on the stage. Yeah.
Sorry to cut you. Also, if anybody who is listening wants to add some of their opinions or their learnings of implementing IaC tools in production or in whatever environment that they are doing, so you can share. If you want to share that as well, you can feel free to. We still have, I think, 15 minutes. We can take questions or experiences, anything.
Yes, sir. Dipankar, you want to go ahead?
Yes. So thank you for letting me speak. So my question is, means I want a feedback regarding that using Terraform as a source control. So should we use Terraform in the main branch to manage the infrastructure, or we should have it in another repository aside that main project one?
When I organize things in Git, I tend to think about life cycle of that something, right? So I often put infrastructure both in separate repositories and in repositories of applications. And what goes where depends on that life cycle. Like, for example, there is a strong chance that whenever I do something with my application, deploy it, for example, there is going to be a database that might need to be updated, managed, or schema or stuff like that, right? And in that case, that database, the code for that database, in my case, would be in the repository of an application. Or I could have a definition of a cluster. Cluster is the life cycle of the cluster is not directly tied to any single application. And in that case, that would be in a different repository. So I would think in terms of life cycle of that something, whether it is tied or not to life cycle of something else.
So, so I want to continue with the question. So I have used Terraform to deploy an EC2 instance, and I want to remove the container and launch a new version of a container using Ansible. So what approach should I use to make Ansible work in the main branch, or should I have it in should I have it in the project repository to in the main branch? Like, yes, so continuously it can change it when a new beta version is released.
In that specific example, I would keep it in the repository of the application because I'm assuming, I might be wrong, that virtual machine you mentioned is dedicated to that single application, right? And then there is that Terraform that creates a virtual machine, and then there is Ansible that does something inside of that virtual machine, and all for the purpose of that application. And the other question or comment was about branches. I strongly believe that all branches need to be mergeable to the mainline. And if they're not, then they're candidates to become separate repositories. So ultimately, everything that is committed, and when I say committed, I don't mean Git commit, but committed, meaning that this is the state I want to have somewhere, should go from the mainline. And all the branches before, if you do use branches, are for the purpose of getting there, getting to the mainline. I create a separate branch, I create a pull request, I do some testing, validation, I merge the pull request, and then it becomes production. Or to be more precise, then it becomes a permanent environment, doesn't have to be production.
So we can use Ansible in the CI/CD as well, like to configure each time a pull request happen or git push happens.
Yeah. So when you put something to Git, you trigger in that scenario a pipeline, and that pipeline orchestrates different steps of a life cycle of something, and among many other steps that could be okay. Now execute Terraform for this, Ansible for that, one after another, and then maybe those some other things in parallel, and so on and so forth. You orchestrate the sequence of certain steps through pipelines, whether that's some people call it CI/CD. I don't like that name, but that would be a separate discussion. But pipelines, like whether there's just Jenkins, GitHub Actions, Argo workflows, any pipeline should do.
Thanks. Really appreciate.
Thank you, Dipankar, for the question, and Victor for the answer. So I see Pawan on the stage. Pawan, would you like to go ahead with the question?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. Hello.
There is some noise from your end. Oh, if you come again.
Hi, everyone.
Meanwhile, if anybody in the audience have any question, then you can request, and I will add you to the stage.
Yeah, just want to add one point that since we are on the Twitter space and it's a place where we network with each other, so those who have joined, make sure to follow Victor. That's the first thing that you should do right now. So follow Victor and his YouTube channel as well, the DevOps Toolkit. It's amazing cloud native content over there with great videos, great presentation, editing, all the stuff, and he explains the concepts very clearly. So you definitely should check out the channel, Victor, and same goes for me. So you should check out Kubesimplify, Kubesimplify workshops that we did recently on Linux, Docker, Kubernetes, GitOps, and a couple of more in pipeline. We had to cancel one by my friend David Rockwood because I was not well, but we will sort that out soon. So yeah, make sure to follow Victor, Kubesimplify, and myself, and obviously network with each other as well. And if you have any last minute questions, we still have 5 minutes. Please be on the stage. And Victor, I would like to ask you to say a few words, your experience with Crossplane, what you do about your channel as well.
Yeah, Crossplane is Crossplane. I would say is that next generation of infrastructure as code. We will probably have to rename it, that whole area, into something else to avoid confusion. But it's a next generation how we manage infrastructure services or anything else for that matter. The whole idea is to extend Kubernetes API so that Kubernetes itself becomes not only something where you run your containers, but a management platform from which you can manage anything you want. With all the benefits that Kubernetes gives us, like what we mentioned before, API, drift detection, reconciliation, and so on and so forth. And the second big benefit, there are many, of course, but second are the compositions. So Crossplane was designed not only for somebody to manage infrastructure, but somebody to define what something is for your company. So let's say that you want to enable developers to manage applications themselves, or clusters, or Lambda functions, anything. And instead of forcing that somebody to learn all the details about all the best practices in a company and how that infrastructure works and so on and so forth, you create what we call composition, meaning, hey, this is the new interface. This is a completely new definition that I just created for you. You can consume it as a service to create a cluster, and it has only the things that matter to you, while the implementation details of that something, let's say a cluster, when related to the things you don't care about, are hidden, like subnets, VPCs, and so on and so forth. So those are the two main things about Crossplane. Being Kubernetes native, being part of the ecosystem, Kube ecosystem or cloud native ecosystem, which is arguably the biggest one we have right now, single API to manage everything, and the drift detection, reconciliation, and the ability to, instead of performing actions for your teammates, hey, I need a cluster, or hey, I need this application deploy, you can create services that your teammates can consume in a very, very easy way. So it's think of it as a way to create your own internal platform. And yes, DevOps Toolkit channel. Watch it, follow it, but only after you watched all the videos for Sam.
Yeah, sure. Make sure you follow both the channels by Saiyam and Victor. So we have another question from Divyendu. Sorry if I am pronouncing your name incorrect. So yes, you can go ahead with the question.
Yeah, no, you pronounce it perfectly. Thank you so much for the opportunity to let me speak. I just had a question around that. Recently, we've been using Jenkins for kind of applying Terraform plans, but do you have any opinions around GitHub Actions being more popular these days, and any opinions or takes on that?
So that I would need more time to answer the question because it's a large topic. But if I would go on a very brief comparison, I would say that Jenkins is unbeatable in terms of the size of the community, what it does, how it does. On the other hand, GitHub Actions is a service. And I personally prefer not to manage stuff myself, but consume something as a service, right? So instead of advantage of GitHub Actions is that I do not need to worry about whether it's running, how it's running, whether it's up, whether it's down, and all those things. I can focus only on defining what I needed to do. So the big selling point for GitHub Actions is that it is SaaS, it is a service. Jenkins, the advantage of Jenkins is the age, right? It's of those tools of that type that still exist and are widely used. It's the oldest one. It has the biggest community, biggest support, and so on and so forth. It has its downsides as well. So cannot declare a clear winner if that's the question.
Okay. No, means I was just looking for, okay, that kind of sums up for me. Thank you so much.
Yep. So I think we will be wrapping up this. And before wrapping up, Saiyam and Victor, would you like to add something as the closing note or something?
The only thing I need to add, I want to add, is that Sam is going to be on Ask Me Anything session soon. I forgot the date, but it's coming very soon on the Devos Toolkit channel. So this collaboration continues, and I'm thrilled to have him as a guest.
Yep, glad to be on that show as well, and so happy to have Victor on this Twitter space. By the way, this is Victor's first Twitter space, so anybody who will be asking Victor in future, where was your first Twitter space? So he'll be saying, with Saiyam on Kubesimplify. So the name is in the history books.
It took me a while to figure it out. I was trying to figure out how can I not access Twitter space on my desktop computer until Sam said mobile. I had no idea.
And thank you so much for joining in, everybody who joined, stayed, listened, and for the questions as well. And thanks, Anurag, for hosting this space as well.
Yep, sure. Thank you, Saiyam. Thank you, Victor. And thank you, everyone who ever joined. So we will wrap up this space, and we will see you soon on another Kubesimplify Twitter space. Thank you very much.